Evil is back. The Drool King Lotor has returned with a dark energy that can destroy the galaxy. Our only hope? The Voltron Force, a team of 5 heroic pilots that control 5 awesome robot lions. When Lotor's monstrous road beasts attack, the lions come together to form Voltron, defender of the universe.
Oh! Let's Voltron! Oh! Let's Voltron! Oh! Let's Voltron!
Welcome, Voltron fans. This is Mark Morell, your host for Let's Voltron, the official Voltron podcast. We're here for another exciting interview, and we're going to do a review of Voltron Force a little bit later on. So I have to welcome my co-host, Greg Tyler. Welcome, Greg.
Hello, Mark. Hello, Voltron fans across the universe. I must tell you that my microphone that I've used for about 6 years on this podcast apparently is on the fritz. Apparently, we had some crossed signals, and that'll be a nice tie into the Voltron Force episode of the same name that we review later in this podcast. But first, we've got a special guest, and we're excited to chat with them. So who is this person, Mark?
Well, I'd like to introduce Ryan Costello, the social media manager for Voltron for Facebook and Instagram from Laughing Dragon Studios. Welcome, Ryan.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm going to insist I'm just a regular guest. I don't think I'm a special guest.
Everyone is special in their own way.
That's
And this is me trying out for a Mr. Rogers podcast.
especially anybody who's making a contribution to Voltron in some way.
Oh yeah, totally.
Fair enough.
So-
I like to think I have been.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. You know, we've been Voltron fans long enough to see different, I guess, iterations of people running social media pages and whatnot for the official Voltron page, and I am actually not part of Instagram, so I haven't seen the Instagram stuff, but Facebook definitely. And you know,
it's the
it's
same
not
stuff.
like yeah, okay, good
Same
deal.
stuff,
So,
different comments.
yeah, but you know, so even if it isn't formally announced as the hands change from one to another, the voice definitely changes, and I have really noticed a significant level of engagement on your side at the Voltron page as well as with the fans. It's been very interactive, and I've seen some pretty deep cuts in some of the posts that have been made in terms of Voltron knowledge and lore and all that great stuff. So, what is your background with Voltron before you got involved with the social media?
Well, I grew up with Voltron. I was born in 80, and I have 3 brothers. So one Christmas, we got the whole Voltron Force. We got the Lions and the pilots. Just one day, we had the whole good guy side of the collection. And so that was always one of my favorite toys growing up. And technically, I was splitting it with my brother, but my older brother got out of Voltron earlier. My younger brother only has vague memories of Voltron, so really, these were my toys. And since then, like, I only recently revisited the episode, so I've mostly been running on memories and momentum. Memories and motivation for that fandom from my childhood. But every time a new iteration of Voltron would come out, I would always check it out whenever there was like, there was the Monster Apocalypse game was announced a couple of years ago, or a couple of decades ago, maybe. It was always like exciting. It's like, yes, it is nice to revisit Voltron anytime that it shows up. I never went out of my way to find Voltron like I have with some of my other fandoms, but I was excited whenever it landed in my lap.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of landing in your lap, how did becoming the social media manager for Voltron land in your lap? How did the interaction between Laughing Dragon Studios and WEP happen?
So it's funny. Laughing Dragon Studios, we are an animation studio. We're based in Montreal, and we are a studio for hire. So we've worked with some major clients. Probably the thing that we are, the thing that's easiest to explain and give us credentials is that we did the 2D animation in Disenchanted on Disney Plus. Mm-hmm. So the sequel to Enchanted, it was, you know, a Disney princess gets whisked into the real world. Then they did a direct to, or like a direct to streaming sequel. We did the 2D animation for that. So we've worked with Disney. We've worked with many of the major companies. And we go to, you know, trade shows and whatnot and let people know we've got these major studios. If you need anything animated, you can come to us. And when my boss spoke with, I believe he spoke with Bob directly, or maybe he just spoke with another WEP rep. but they were more interested in what we do on social media to promote the studio, because we also do these original shorts on the Laughing Dragon Studios Facebook page, Instagram, LinkedIn. For some reason, we've got a huge audience, even though that is not a fun platform. Just we seem to bring the fun to that platform. And so, yeah, so they were like, we don't need to hire you as an animation studio, but we love what you do on social media. And so that wasn't a service we offered. We had to figure out what an appropriate thing to charge for these services would be. But we did have the infrastructure in place. We knew the programs we were using. We knew how to analyze data to know how things were going. And so, an agreement came to, they came together, they made an agreement, and we took over the Denver social media. It's Denver the Last Dinosaur, which is also a web production. And, Denver is fondly remembered, but does not have a big pop culture footprint right now. And so the fact that we were able to take this and give it a new audience on TikTok, which is not even the demographic that grew up on Denver. And so, like, the fact that we were able to grow Denver's audience gave WEP the confidence in us to give, a much bigger license, and that is the keys to the Voltron kingdom.
Yeah.
So that's where I come in, because I'm not actually on the social media team. I'm a writer at Laughing Dragon Studios, but I do handle the comments for the Laughing Dragon accounts. Like, I don't manage the content, I don't direct the content, but I reply to the comments on it. And so between that and some other experience I have writing for like 80s action properties and like anyway, on some of the other projects I've worked on, my boss felt that I would actually be the best voice for Voltron to take over, not just replying to comments, but actually like directing the content, coming up with what the posts are, designing the concept for the visuals. I do not make the visuals. We have an art department, and I need it. I am not a visual person, so like we've got just a nice team of about 5 or 6 people that are working together to make sure that Voltron has this daily content, that we are able to engage with the fans, and that, that it's working. And it seems to be. People have been replying. Like, we've gotten a lot of positive feedback, and the numbers are backing it up.
That's great.
Well, that's great. If you guys are able to bring life to Denver the Last Dinosaur on TikTok, that seems like oil and water in a lot of ways. If you guys are able to make some magic there, then you guys are a perfect fit for Voltron, which obviously still has a pretty large media footprint as opposed to poor Denver.
And I'll be honest, like, for people of our generation, you are not going to get the Denver content. You're going to look at this, you're going to say, that has 200,000 likes, and it's just this weird little video with a caption, but it is very popular with the TikTok audience.
Well, that's great. I actually am not I've never registered with TikTok either. So, but I'm
Now's your last chance.
In all of your interactions with Voltron's fans and everything, what have you learned what is really going on with Voltron fans right now, would you say?
There is a real generational divide. So we post the same content to Facebook and Instagram, and the stuff that works on Facebook, the ones that get the big likes, are the ones that are Defender of the Universe focused or broad brand focused. Whereas on Instagram, all it needs is Legendary Defender reference. Like the Karan one was just showed the 4 different Karans and was a little post about how Karan's one of the few characters that's been in every Voltron series. But he had these 2 personalities. Which would you rather the next time we see Voltron? So first of all, the fact that I said the next time we see Voltron really clicked with the Legendary Defender fans who have never been through a Voltron reboot. So the concept that every 10 years there's a new Voltron series is new to them. And so they were like, is this a major announcement? It's like, no, we're just celebrating the 40th anniversary. That's why there's more engagement. There was like a combination of like, this is great, but also damage control to make sure that people were not reading into too much of the messaging. The audience really is split, not necessarily like adversarially, just that you can see which age group works on which social media platform and what content they react to better. Although I was surprised the Voltron Third Dimension post we posted on the 3rd was huge on both platforms. And I was worried nobody would care. I had made this big idea that like every 3rd of the month, if it's a weekday, we're doing Voltron Third Dimension content. And I was worried that I was going to like it and then nobody was going to react to it. But no, they both had major engagements, like both platforms.
So I remember you had mentioned a little something, you should look forward to May the 3rd then, and just by saying that, everybody automatically assumed this was going to be some kind of major announcement.
Oh, it wasn't automatic. So yes, on the Cran post, somebody had mentioned like, hey, it's great to see Voltron the Third Dimension Cran. Voltron the Third Dimension never gets any love. And so I specifically replied to that person saying, well, then you're going to be excited about May the 3rd. But I didn't write enough context into my reply to say, like, you, this person I'm talking about, you'll get Voltron the Third Dimension content on the 3rd. So people were just taking a screen capture saying, you'll be excited about May the 3rd, and thinking I was talking to all Voltron fans, or specifically Legendary Defender fans, that there was some major announcement coming on May the 3rd. And so from then on, for the next like week, because it was really just a couple of weeks ago, every time anyone posted about May the 3rd, they got a paragraph. They got like, oh yes, here's what I meant by that. Do not get excited, because as much as we want traffic to the site, we also don't want to set you up and then get you disappointed. Like
Right.
as much as as much as Third Dimension doesn't get content, it's even worse if all the people that are showing up for this announcement are like, this is what we get, and like trashing on Third Dimension, which was supposed to be like a celebration of a more obscure part of the Voltron catalog.
Right, right. Yeah, I think the Third Dimension is massively underappreciated. To me, it's kind of it's silly to say, well, it looks like a product of its time. Every production, no matter when it's made, looks like a product of its time. It's just that that time there was such it was such a nascent time for 3D CGI in television, and things improved in leaps and bounds over the course of a small number of years. And everything, I guess, maybe looks even more dated from that perspective, given how animation technology and art progressed in that medium over the years. But I really enjoy the show.
Well, one of the things I find funny is that they say that Voltron, Defender of the Universe, you could watch without understanding the language, without sound on, and you'll be able to follow the plot. Voltron Third Dimension is kind of the opposite. You don't have to watch it if you find the visuals are hard to watch. You can just listen to it, and you get most of the original cast doing the familiar voices without having to rush because they don't have a stopwatch anymore. And so, like, Voltron the Third Dimension is kind of a Voltron audiobook. You can follow just by listening along.
Yeah, that's a fair argument. Yeah, and I would think that if you know who's talking, you don't need to worry about their mouths not moving a lot of the time, because they're wearing those helmets that cover their mouths to expedite production. So yeah,
Lip syncing is expensive.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, the Third Dimension also introduced the idea that the lions were sentient. So, if you really get into the lore behind how they discovered that and what they know about the lions and what they learn about the lions as they go through the show, it's just really engaging.
Yeah, I also find that they go a lot more into the elemental connections between the lions and their environments. Like, as far as I know in Defender, they just are. They just are in those environments. They just happen to have weapons that blast it, and it's never really explored. So Third Dimension made it plot points, made it really an interesting thing to explore.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. So, have there been any other surprises along the way, or things that happened that didn't surprise you as you've gone through social media in the name of Voltron?
So there was one surprise on the back end, because we got the contract in March with the plan to launch in April, and so we right away wanted to make like all of our April content available before April 1st, so that like everything was ready to go. And we understood that we couldn't use Legendary Defender footage because that was co-owned by DreamWorks, and so they would need special permission to use any of that. And so the first month of our new content did not reference Legendary Defender at all. And in our plan, saying like our social media plan, one of the challenges we mentioned was that the fact that we can't mention the most recent and one of the most popular iterations of Voltron, people are going to notice if we don't say anything. If we do say anything, it's just going to be really weird and technical, and it's just not going to be a fun conversation. So this is going to be an obstacle that we have to get over. And Bob read it, and he was like, oh, I don't think you should avoid Legendary Defender. We have a great relationship with DreamWorks. You go ahead. And we were like, I don't know why we thought we weren't allowed to do it, but you'll notice that as of May 1st, suddenly the Legendary Defender content got added into the mix.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, it completely changed the tempo of what we were releasing and just how people were responding to it. Because there's a lot to explore with Legendary Defender, and I know that it landed with a lot of love, and it left with a lot of anger and mixed feelings. And now some time has passed, and it's a good time to like open up a conversation. See, these are the things that were great about this series, and now that you can kind of look at it as a whole, reinterpret it. Plus, everyone that was watching it is more mature now. Like they're getting into that like older fan era.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of there to be like, come here, like this is how fans interact. We can have fun. We can have conversations. We can have like a silly joke picture with like an actual serious post about like some of the important impact that this show had. And it's working very well.
Right.
Great. Well, glad the confusion or whatever was going on there, miscommunication got ironed out pretty early on. That's great, because I imagine that would have been an extremely difficult thing to navigate as people start asking what the heck's going on.
Right.
Well, without it, we would basically just be a Defender of the Universe platform that occasionally references Third Dimension and Voltron Force. But really, Third Dimension and Voltron Force have very small fans, and those fans are Voltron fans. There are very few people that are Third Dimension fans that don't want any other kind of Voltron. So it would have just continued to be a Defender of the Universe content, which is great, and it's fun, and I'm having a lot of fun putting that stuff together. But bringing in Legendary Defender really broadens the content that we're covering.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, have you had any questions about a live action movie yet?
You know what's come up? And like my canned response is, wouldn't that be great? Because like, what else do I say? I don't want anything to be misinterpreted. I don't want people to read into what I'm saying. So I'll either say like, wouldn't that be great? Or when people they come in with an accusation like, oh, Voltron is active because these are your plans, aren't they? And it's like, it's for the anniversary, guys. We're just celebrating a milestone.
Right. So are you promoting things that are coming out as a result of the 40th anniversary?
Yes, like we did a shared post with Playmates for the 40th anniversary re-release of their Lions. We've done some shared posts. We've got something coming up to talk about the Little People, the Mattel Little People that set, which
Yes.
frankly is an amazing set. And honestly, like this isn't the first time that I've looked at Little People and been like, that's not for me, but I really like what they are doing here. And this might be one of the best ones with like the cardstock Voltron that is both a display and effectively an extra figure in the set.
Yeah.
And they just did an announcement for Funko Fusion, an adventure, I guess just an adventure game. It's a video game. And Voltron has not played a major part in any of the footage that they've shown so far, but he is right in the middle of the poster, like clear as day. That is very clearly Voltron, and you do see the Voltron Legendary Defender logo. If you don't know that it's Legendary Defender Voltron, you might not be sure just based on the visual, but the logo gives it away. It flat out says Legendary Defender in the logo on the poster.
Yeah. Do you remember the Funko Pop Blitz video game?
Funko Pop Blitz? No, I don't.
Oh, you don't remember that? Yeah,
What platform
Legendary.
was it on?
It was on like Android and iOS.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I played it myself, and we had a whole episode about it on the podcast. So Funko Pop Blitz was a video game, Bejeweled, like that
Yeah.
kind of thing. All right, now imagine doing that kind of stuff, but then there's also other things that go along with it. You play that game to do other things, to get through levels and all that kind of stuff.
So right now I'm playing the Royal Match game, and I play the match 3, and my daughter then dresses up our kingdom. So it sounds like the same type of thing.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
that kind of thing. And with this, you were able to earn the characters from Voltron.
Oh, not just Voltron himself, but like what, the pilots,
So
paladins?
you would be able to earn all the paladins and Voltron himself, and this was all the Legendary Defender versions. So
Very cool.
yeah, it was a great game. I loved playing it. Do you remember when we did that episode, Greg?
I remember the episode. I never played the game, so that was all new to me as you told me about it. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's a neat idea.
So with Funko, of course, you know, there's so many more things than just Funko Pop figures now at Funko. So
Yeah, well, I think they must have known the ceiling was about to be hit with what they could release, and so I know they did the Funko Pop board games, and they've just broadened into other vinyl figures.
yeah,
But Voltron hasn't really gotten a lot of bites at the other Funko apples, right?
no,
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 what's that new thing they did where they packaged a Voltron, a stylized Voltron in a fake
So-
blockbuster VHS clamshell? I
yeah.
forget what
So
that's called. That's a Funko thing, right?
yes,
All right, this one is not on my radar, but it's good to know. Like, I occasionally have been doing these posts about really fun old material that, like old tie-in merch. We did the Reebok shoes and we did the Lego set.
Yeah.
Okay.
okay. So
Yeah.
This is a fairly recent thing, like within the last year, right?
to get it
So you
out.
open this clamshell thing,
Yeah.
like an old Disney VHS movie.
Well, that's pretty cute.
Yeah. So this is from Funko. It's a collectible figure, and it is considered the Blockbuster Rewind version.
Okay, so it's got Blockbuster branding on it. I saw the tag,
Yeah,
but
it
the
does.
glare was on there.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if it was
Yeah.
just like referencing the logo. Well, that's fun.
Yeah. So there you go. There's a good look at it.
Yeah.
Cool.
So
it makes-
that's another area that Funko has interacted with Voltron there. So
Yeah.
that's a nice thing.
And those were available at Hot Topic.
Oh, okay, we don't have Hot Topic locally, so that must be why I missed it. But I'm surprised I haven't seen that referenced anywhere in just the research I've been doing for my job.
And there was even a Blockbuster Rewind character card.
Okay.
So that's
nice.
modeled after the old membership cards. That's
Yeah,
fun.
I recognize it. That's fun.
There we go. So yeah,
I wonder
those
if he has any late fees.
No, they got rid of those, and then they went out of business.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yep. So that was fun.
Yeah.
So
So
all
what?
kinds- All kinds of
Huh?
cool things coming out for the 40th anniversary.
Yeah. So what can people who visit Voltron in social media expect to see without spoiling too much in the days and weeks ahead?
Oh, okay. Like I said, we're promoting those two products. Oh, I did something with the Super 7, the glow in the dark Voltron.
Oh yeah.
Ah, yes.
I just put it on a windowsill for 2 weeks facing the sun. And then I brought it down to what we call our content kitchen and just put it in a photo booth, put a still camera on it, and then turn the lights off. And not only does the glow really show, but there's this like split second where it just goes total dark and then the glow comes up. It looks amazing.
Oh,
And I cannot wait to put that up there. That is way better than I ever imagined it would work.
oh,
that's
is so
nice.
cool. Can't wait to see that.
And then something else that's fun. One of the first things that I put on the calendar of like to be developed. So it was supposed to be short-term plans, became long-term plans, and that is putting up a recipe for Nanny's Astro Cakes, which is something that just they make fun of her for her cooking, and then she threatens like, well, then you won't get Astro Cakes, and then suddenly all of the pilots are in line. So it's like these Astro Cakes must really be something. So
Yeah.
I put together a recipe, but I wanted an actual Astro Cake. Like I had a vision of like black frosting with silver sprinkles on it, so it really looks like just a spacescape. And the problem with that is that I then need to cook it. And we have a kitchen at work, but we are not allowed stoves or anything. Like it's against the fire code. So this is something I had to do in my own spare time. And like I've got 2 kids and I've got freelance work and I've got a podcast network that I manage. So fitting in a special baking project and making it look picturesque was like, this is going to be a challenge.
Wow.
But this last weekend, as of recording, was Mother's Day, and so we had a fancy tea party where I invited my mom and my aunt, and we did it to celebrate my wife. And I just spent the morning cooking. And while I was doing all this stuff for the tea party, I was like, and we're gonna have space themed cupcakes at this fancy tea party that we're putting together, and it looks great. And I hope it does well, because after going through all the work of like baking it and taking the picture and like just finding the perfect cupcake about all the ones that we made, I presented it to Hope, who Hope is the one who does the logistics side of it. So she'll tell me what we can expect and how well things are doing. And she's she knew vaguely that this thing was always on the schedule. But as soon as I actually got into like the point of no return, she's like, well, hope it does well, because like baking posts don't tend to do well on social media. I was like, well, okay, maybe I did all this work for one pretty and delicious cupcake that maybe one other person will bake.
Well,
Right,
I
we'll
am
see.
looking forward to it because I remember when DreamWorks was running the social media, when Legendary Defender was in active production and release on Netflix. They did quite a bit with some of the culinary delights of Legendary Defender, all sorts of
Yeah.
fun at conventions and things like that. So I think we get some good response. We'll see.
Right.
Most of the food on Legendary Defender was legendarily bad. Like the paladins could barely stomach it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if I would want to try any of those recipes.
Yeah, at the one convention, the San Diego Comic-Con, the one year they had Hunk's food truck.
Oh, nice.
That was fun. That was definitely fun.
What kind of
Those
stuff
are
are
the
they serving?
fundamentals of cooking. Sorry.
What was that,
Was
Ryan?
it
What did they serve?
Oh, all kinds of different foods. The one thing that they served was Hunk's food goo, and
Yep.
it was like a greenish. I don't know if you call it pistachio or something like that, but it was like in the shape and substance of some kind of food goo. But yeah,
Did you try it?
I did try it. It was more like a frozen treat, so it wasn't that bad.
Nice.
And of course, as fun as it was that year, that was helpful.
I'm sorry.
You were
go ahead.
asking the things that people can look forward to. So there's one post
Yeah,
that actually, okay, there's two posts. One of them I'm not going to spoil. I think this one it speaks for
cool.
itself. But one of them, when I presented it to WEP, nobody got it. So I'm going to just set it up here and hopefully people will come and check it out. I noticed that the Mr. Beast logo is almost exactly like the Voltron, like the side-facing lion logo.
Mhm.
And so we just we customized the Voltron logo so it's in Mr. Beast colors with like the pink lightning bolt off the eye. And then I just wrote the plot of the first couple of episodes of Defender of the Universe like it was, like with the cadence of a Mr. Beast video. So he's just talking about like, oh, they arrive on this planet. Oh, but they got to find 5 keys for these 5 lions. But we don't even know where one of the keys is. We gave it to a space mouse. So yeah, we'll see if they can do that and like get $250,000 and save planet Ares. But first, we're going to hear from Robeastables. And it's just like a stupid little thing that I think is either amazing or terrible. And I have no idea what to predict the reaction will be to it.
Yeah.
That's fun. Well, you never know until you take a chance. That's great.
Exactly. And like we're putting out 5 new memes a day. So if one of them just doesn't hit, at least we tried.
Right.
That's cool.
Right. So, there's over, 200 million followers of Mr. Beast around the world, right?
He's #1 on YouTube, which is the
Yeah.
#1 streaming platform in the world. So yeah,
That's right.
some people should know what this is referencing.
Yeah, I think you might find a few.
Yeah.
That's great. So
Good deal.
you had mentioned earlier that you also do some podcasting. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in 2008, I discovered a podcast called Slice of Sci-Fi, and I'd always kind of just like felt like I wanted to get a message out there, and I never really had a platform for it, and I never really knew what format it would take. And then like I hear this podcast, and it's like, no, I like this. It's casual but informed, and it's geeky and it's funny, and like it's both sides. Like it's critical, but it's not like just like dumping on some stuff that I don't like. It's thoughtful, and it really spoke to me. And I was like, I would like to do this. Now, what is the message that I want to get out there? And all my life, I've been a Dungeons and Dragons player or a tabletop role player. And around that time, me and my friends were big into the 3rd edition of Dungeons and Dragons. And then they announced that there was a 4th edition coming out, and we got the early word on it. It's like, I don't like this 4th edition. So what if that's our podcast? It's the 3.5 Private Sanctuary. It's where you come, this small group of people that are loyal to the old edition, and we'll just celebrate this old edition. As it turns out, 4th edition was not popular. Like people, it is one of the most contentious. There we go, the most contentious edition of Dungeons and Dragons. And not only were we these people that were just kind of keep the third edition alive, but because third edition was released, basically it was an open source edition of Dungeons and Dragons. Another company named Paizo came in and they said, we're going to take the 3.5 edition, which seems to be what a lot of our audience likes because they were a third-party publisher of third edition stuff. And we're going to make a new game called Pathfinder, which we are totally legally allowed to do. And it's basically going to be Dungeons and Dragons, but not Dungeons and Dragons. And here we were doing that exact same messaging. So we got in on the ground floor of this other company doing the same thing. And then at some point, Pathfinder, their game, outsold Dungeons and Dragons, which has never happened. Dungeons and Dragons is the Kleenex of the tabletop role-playing space. But fourth edition just did not hit the market, or they misjudged how to sell the game. And like, okay, no, I could talk way too long. I've been doing this podcast for 15 years. I cannot go on tangents because this will just become a giant Dungeons and Dragons Pathfinder thing. But in any case, we were there when podcasts were not a thing. This is 2008, 2009. And when I invited people onto the podcast, I had to explain what a podcast is. People did not know what this was. It was a whole new format to everybody. And so we and this company just kind of like started this journey together. They got huge. We were a podcast specifically promoting them, which, you know, they would have been successful either way. But we got to give like superstar treatment to the people that were working on the game, which was different. And it was just like, it was fun and it was exciting. And it also like, it's trained me in a lot better ways of communicating. Cause like if we had one episode that was a review of a book, the next episode might be a person who wrote on that book. So if we said we hated that book, we had to justify it and we had to make sure that we were saying it in constructive ways because, you know, we wanted to have this positive relationship. We wanted to get the inside scoop on these books and we wanted to just like keep having this partnership. So yeah, I don't think I've actually mentioned the name of the podcast in all this time. So we were originally 3.5 Private Sanctuary, which was no longer appropriate when we became Pathfinder Podcast. So we became No Direction, KNOW, because that's a druid spell. And they're Pathfinders, so Pathfinder, No Direction, we felt like it was a nice a synergy there. And so we had that podcast. It's still going. I'm no longer the host of it because history repeating itself, Pathfinder then went to its second edition after about 10 years on the shelf. And I just didn't love it. It just did not speak to me. And it was weird having to fake enthusiasm for the first time. And so I was like, the people coming to our podcast and the people that are working on these games deserve somebody who is authentically interested in this. So I handed the podcast over to Luis Loza and Vanessa Hoskins, who were both working on the network. But now Luis, he actually, even at the time, was working for Paizo, the publishers of Pathfinder. And so he was never a great fit because he could not talk beyond a certain point. Like he had to he wasn't towing the company line, but he couldn't speculate because he knew what was coming next. And it was just like the dynamic wasn't there. And Vanessa now works for Wizards of the Coast, the publishers of Dungeons and Dragons. Wow. So eventually we had to do a full restart of this podcast. We brought in Esther and Navarre, who were not members of the podcast network that we had. They were just like brand new faces, brand new voices, and brand new perspectives, who were both like, they knew more about Pathfinder second edition than they did first edition, which is exactly what the podcast needed at the time. So I still run the network that is on, and I host a podcast on there called Upshift. I mentioned earlier that I've worked on other 80s properties. I am a co-designer of Essence 20, which is a role-playing system published by Renegade Game Studios. And I am an author on the G.I. Joe, Transformers, and My Little Pony role-playing game core rulebooks, and have also worked a little bit on the Power Rangers core rulebook. And so, I've written over 300,000 words for like G.I. Joe role-playing game alone.
Oh, that's cool.
And so the podcast is in promotion of the Essence 20 system, the different products that we've got going on, giving people insight, giving people advice on how to run it. And it's still a fairly niche game, so I'm kind of, not only am I an author on it, I'm also the only real guy on social media that's promoting it in that way, which is also one of the ways, like when I applied for the job, when I knew that Renegade was working on these licenses, I said like, well, here's my credentials as a writer, here's my credentials as a fan of these properties. And also I have all these social media connections and all these things they can do. So when you're hiring me, you are also getting a podcast and you will be getting blog content, you'll be getting regular promotion. Just, you don't have to pay for it. This is just going to be on top of it. I'm going to do it anyway, whether you hire me or not. So like, this is just an added bonus to hiring me on board. And they liked me. They actually brought me on board more for my my brand knowledge, for because again, I am an 80s kid. I grew up on all this stuff. I know it very well. And so since then I've kind of become one of the main writers for it, and I've been like a project manager on the books now, which is like a weird amount of power for a freelancer, because I don't work for Renegade. I don't work at Renegade. I do contract by contract. So those are all the other things that I do in my spare time. I think we were talking about cupcakes. I don't know. I don't remember how we got here.
Astro cakes.
Yeah, something about nannies and space mice and all that. Yeah.
That's fine.
Well,
that's great.
You do some pretty exciting things. That's really great. And
I have an amazing life.
It sounds that way. And you certainly bring in an amazing perspective to Voltron social media, and we're glad to enjoy your posts and interactions out there. So that's great to have you joining the Voltron social media family there.
Honestly, I am mostly writing things that amuse me, and I am just amazed that it's catching on. It has been such a fun last couple of months. The last couple of years have been great, but these last couple of months specifically, man, I'm having a great time.
Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful.
It's great to see you on as the social media manager for Voltron for both Instagram and Facebook. And thank you, Laughing Dragon Studios, for bringing you on board.
I do hope that we have like a working relationship going forward. I really think that you two have so much knowledge, and you are so interconnected with everything that's happened in the past. Like, when I am looking for information for like the deep dive section of the posts, I'm often going to Let's Voltron and looking up old episodes and seeing like what's been said, and like, because you tend to get not only like the deepest digs into this content, but it's like directly from the people that worked on it. So it's great. You are flavoring the perspective. Like, you're making me sound like an expert. Really, all I am is listening to your podcast and summarizing some of the things that some of your guests have said.
Yeah, and that's quite all right. If you want to use that stuff, that's fine. We have enjoyed, all these hours and hours and hours that we put into the podcast, and all the interactions with all the fans, all the people who have ever worked on any of the shows. It's just been a blast doing that all these years. And, who knows, the next iteration of Voltron, what's that going to be like?
Why, do you know something? Are they making a movie? They're making a live action movie. I knew it.
Legendary Defender season 9? Oh, no. Please. We know nothing. That was just me talking out of my ear.
Here's the thing. I know that there's something that Ross and Marshall Thurber and I already have in common, and it's not just being fans of Voltron. It's that Sideshow Collectibles Voltron, that big statue.
Yeah.
We are both one of, or two of the 1,000 that own one.
Wow.
That's like 6 steps to Kevin Bacon right there.
Yeah. That's how we connect through
all right.
Now, before you make a purchase like that, do you have like an area pre-selected for where it's going to set up?
I did have an area pre-selected, and now a lot of people like to put theirs like on a, in a case or something like that. I wanted to have it out in the open. So I just have it basically on a table with a black curtain over it. You know what I mean? So it's got a black base, and it just sits there in the corner of the room, and it really accentuates the whole room.
At first, I was picturing you had the black curtain over the statue, and I just figured anytime you had guests over, you did a big reveal.
No, the black curtain is just over the table.
On the table, yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Drum roll, please.
And then do the David Copperfield, right? Make it disappear.
Love it.
There you go.
Well, good deal.
It's going to be great. Looking forward to all of your posts out there.
All right. Well, I'm glad you guys are liking them.
Yeah. We look forward to seeing and reading more, and you're always welcome back if you have anything you'd like to share with us on the podcast.
Sure. Actually, I have something I grabbed here. It is the one thing that survived my childhood collection, and that is my original Pidge.
Oh, wow.
All right.
Cool.
And the reason he survived is actually because when I was in Scouts, I made the Pidge-mobile out of a Cub car. It's
Mhm.
kind of
Oh
fading into
yeah.
the background. So yeah, so I say I made this. My dad 100% made this. I put my name on it. I am not handy or crafty at all. But, I spent some time with him and gave him some tips. I think I chose the colors. And yeah, the fact that he managed to like Dremel out a perfect seat for Pidge to pilot it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nice.
I've made many Pinewood derbies in my life. So I made them myself, and then I made them with my son when he became.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So those were fun. So I want to really thank you for joining us on Let's Voltron, the official Voltron podcast, Ryan.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, it's been great to meet you. See you around cyberspace.
Voltron will be back after these messages. And now, back to Voltron, defender of the universe.
Well, that was fun talking with Ryan and learning about how he keeps the social media lights on for Voltron and keeps all their signals in alignment, unlike the crossed signals of the Voltron Force episode that we're about to review, right, Mark?
That's right. That's right.
Huh?
We're about to review Cross Signals. That's the Voltron Force episode 22, right?
Yes. How about I run through the stats on that like I usually do before we dive in?
That's great. Go right ahead.
All right, so it's crossed signals in case that hasn't sunk in yet. It's the 22nd episode to be aired, production number 122. It originally aired back on March 28th, 2012. Directed as all the episodes were by John Delaney, whom we interviewed on the podcast some time back. That was a lot of fun. Story by Todd Garfield and Jeremy Corey, written by Adam Beechin, who had also written the excellent episode Predator Row Beast. That was the 11th episode. So he did number 11 and then doubled it and did number 22. The cast are most of our usual favorites. Ashley Ball as Allura, Doron Bell Jr. as Vince, Shannon Chan Kent as Larmina, Andrew Francis playing Lance, and Commander Cossack, and the first officer of a ship that we'll learn about shortly. Ron Halder returned as Mayhawks. Mark Hildreth played Lotor and a crew member of that ship. Giles Panton played Keith, as always. Ty Olson as Hunk. Vincent Tong played Daniel and a comms officer on that mysterious spaceship. And Sam Vincent returned to play Pidge. And that's it.
Right.
All right.
Thank you for that. Okay. So where do we start? We start on Castle Doom. We're in Mayhawks' lab. And we find Mayhawks scrolling through display screens in a darkened chamber. They show schematics and data concerning Voltron. We see Voltron full body schematic kind of rotating around with orbs circling around the robot. And then we see Commander Cossack pop up on a monitor. And Commander Cossack says, "Sir, your new satellite is now operational." Mayhawks doesn't turn in his chair, he just smiles. And he says, "Thank you, Commander Cossack. Hopefully my Hegarium enhanced frequencies will boost its signal. There's a certain Drool fleet I've been dying to contact." And he acts like he's going to get some kind of reaction out of Commander Cossack, but Commander Cossack just stares blankly. And then he says, "Okay, we're through here. Be gone."
That's funny. So I must cut in that 3D view of Voltron.
Yeah.
So some people might know I've been working as a hobby project on a set of combining Voltron Force Lions that can change centers and all that stuff. It's just something I work on sporadically. And I used the sequence here of the spinning as an early visual reference because it's one of very, very few that shows the robot from a straight side view or front, and it rotates. You get the 360 view. It's a really great visual reference. So I know this scene very well.
Okay. So what we see then is outside of Castle Doom, an elaborate and bizarre satellite dish slowly turns and angles upward, then shoots a blue beam into space.
When he talked about a satellite, when Cossack mentioned a satellite, my first thought was it was going to be an orbiting satellite as opposed to a satellite dish. So to see this antenna pop out of the roof of the castle, it was a little bit shocking to me. What did you think? Do you remember?
Yeah, when he first said your new satellite is now operational, we think in terms of satellites that orbit around our planet.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I wasn't thinking that either.
Yeah. Anyway.
But yeah, so this blue beam shoots out into space, and we have no idea what it's for yet.
Yeah. But he said Hungarian, so it can't be good.
It's always that way. So what we do see is the next scene is the Castle of Lions Command Center, and we see a close-up of running feet on the Voltron Force and the cadets, and then we see Hunk saying, "We're picking up a distress call." Pidge says it's from an Erusian explorer ship, but the transmission is encrypted with a very old code. And Hunk said, "I didn't know there were any explorer missions going on now." And Lance says, "Hunk, if news didn't come with a guitar riff and booming drums, you probably wouldn't notice it." And Hunk says, "Ooh, harsh, but fair."
I'm just glad this was not a joke about food.
Yes,
Because Hunk always gets the food jokes, but it's great that it was around his interest in music this time.
which we saw inside the music with the whole reference to Stereolactic, right?
Right, exactly. Now I have to, and of course the Hunk Yard when he and Larmina were talking about the music they'd each made on their own.
Yeah,
Um, so to Hunk's point, when he says, "I didn't know there were any Explorer missions going on," I still wonder when I watch this show, and I love Voltron Force. I still wonder, are there any other people in the Castle of Lions at all? Much less is there an active Space Force. And I don't mean, like the United States Space Force. I mean any kind of space exploration other than the Lions leaving the planet. Um, it's a valid thing. I mean, who's there? Is there any space flight going on from Eris other than Voltron? I don't know.
right. We don't know. But Daniel says the distress call says they're under attack from a drool fleet. And then Keith says, "Less talking, more rescuing." And here comes a really interesting sequence.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So let's go through this because the script says the Force and the cadets make their trademarked way to the Lions. Now, when you say trademarked, is this officially trademarked?
Oh heck no. That's just a colloquial thing. You can't trademark an animation sequence.
Oh, why
But
not? Why can't you trademark, how the pilots go to their Lions? You can't
uh,
trademark that?
it's not a mark. You can't trademark something that isn't a mark.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm a bit of a stickler about this because I think I see so many people online, including people who really ought to know better, who work in business, confuse the terms copyright and trademark. They are apples and oranges.
So when, like, say, Rick and Morty, when they did their episode with Voltron, but it was with ferrets,
Uh,
they did have a sequence where they went to their ferrets, right?
I haven't seen it, but I know of it. Yeah.
So in that way, we could say, well, it's not going to Lions, so it's not breaking any kind of trademark.
Sure.
All right. So anyway, what we saw was each of them going to the zip lines.
Yeah, and when you say each of them, it's all of them.
Yeah, so here's the interesting part because originally in the original Voltron Defender of the Universe, we saw each of the 5 pilots go to zip lines, which go into speeders, which go into the Lions, right?
Hmm.
And here you see, of course, the 3 cadets also going. So whenever you saw a tandem, you saw Keith and Daniel go together. You saw Pidge and Vince go together, and you saw Allura and Larmina go together.
Right.
Okay. So these things could fit 2 people.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen clips, sort of abbreviated clips of how different characters get to the Lions and all that. I think this might be the only time in the entire series that we see all 8, pilots and cadets going into the 5 Lions as a group.
Mhm.
So it's really neat to see. When they go in tandem, you don't see two people hanging off the same zip line, which is good. Each
Right.
one has their own, but it does make me wonder if they get tangled up as they
Well,
go down the tube.
well, when they get into the speeder, they each have their own seat, so they're
Yeah,
not sitting on each other's lap. And
right.
then when they get to the, it's like the speeder ball, and the ball gets lifted up right to the cockpit of the Lion.
Yeah.
There's a little elevator that lifts them out of that into the cockpit, and they can
Yeah.
both fit on that. It's not
Mhm.
just one size for one person, it can fit two people.
Yeah, I mean the lions in this show have always been two seaters, kind of like a lot of fighter jets in the modern age, or helicopters, where you got someone in the front and someone in the back. Well, I mean they've had that as an established thing on this show since the first episode, but this is I think the only time we ever saw how they all get there, including the people in the front and back seats. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah, and then we see each of the lions roar from each of their respective locations before they zoom out, and then we see the black lion coming out of the top of the castle.
Yeah.
So I just thought that whole sequence was just great to see, all done as well as it was.
Oh yeah, start to finish. I mean, to see the whole thing, this is nice.
Okay, so when we do go out into space, it says the five lions rendezvous and zoom away into deeper space. When they say zoom away, it gave me the idea of hyperspace, like, because it looked like they shot like hyperspace, boom, and then just like disappeared.
Hmm. Yeah, same here.
Yeah. Okay, so they get to where they're going, and we're closing in on an Erusian explorer ship hanging at an angle in space, lifeless. And unlike the hologram, it looks scarred and scorched and battle worn. And
Of
then
course, you know that there's something wrong with the ship because it's not perfectly horizontal like on Star Trek.
exactly, exactly.
Even though space has no up and down, if it's at an angle, something's wrong.
It could have been like this.
Yeah, yeah. I remember in Star Trek 6 when a Klingon ship with the Chancellor, the head of the Klingon government, appears and is flying almost vertically in front of the Enterprise, and everyone's looking totally baffled, and then it spins around and is horizontal. I just love the way, wow, it's moving upward. That's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
Okay, so we pull back slowly and we reveal a cluster of drool ships also hanging similarly dead in space and also battle damaged. And then Alora says, "We're too late." Larmina looks past Alora squinting and says, "But how late? This doesn't look like it just happened. That explorer ship looks pretty old." And Vince says, "They all look pretty old." And Pitch says, "Whoa, according to this ship was listed as missing more than 100 years ago." And Keith says, "This doesn't make any sense." And then Daniel says, "So does this mean we've answered a distress signal from the past?"
dun dun dun.
So at that point, we're going into the main titles, and we see the actual title of the episode, Cross Signals.
Yep, teaser's over.
Yep.
Yeah, so okay, I gotta stop and just say visually, I really wish that this show, this episode in particular, and the Hunkyard had taken the opportunity to use this as an excuse to drop in a few Easter eggs. I would love to have seen a skull ship design that was more reminiscent of Defender of the Universe here. Maybe even something inspired by the Stellar Ship Explorer from 80s Voltron as this Explorer ship. Just something that it has a little bit of a visual tip of the hat. Just like in the Hunkyard, I legit wish that we had seen the wreckage of Amalgamus lying around in there from the third dimension. Just a fan nerdy thing. I wish they'd done it, but the designs they have are really nice too. So
Yeah. So Alora says, "There's something about this that I really don't like." And she says, but I agree with all of you. We won't understand how we got that century-old distress signal unless we board that explorer. So they determine that they have to go on the ship. Daniel says, great, when do we leave? And Keith says, we don't. And Larmina says, is this another you cadets aren't ready yet thing? And Keith says, actually, no, a team needs to be posted out here to watch the lions while we look around the explorer. You up for it? And of course, Daniel and Larmina both shout yes right away. But Vince, he's like, But then Daniel and Vince start talking to each other telepathically without moving their lips. Remember from the last episode that we finished? They were able
Yes.
to start knowing each other's thoughts.
Yeah. So in the last episode, Daniel was stuck in a Voltron mind space, and Vince had to use his special abilities to go into that mind space and extract Daniel's mind from it, restore it to his body. And from that point forward, Daniel and Vince had a telepathic connection. So there you go.
Right. So Daniel says Vince, and Vince says, huh? And this is all telepathic. Oh, Daniel, I'm still not used to this. You got to warn me if you're going to do this telepathic thing. So Daniel says, what? How? Anyway, it's one thing to sound freaked in your thoughts. Only I can hear those. But if they hear it, and Vince says, but I am freaked. This place is like a graveyard. And Daniel says, dude, it's our first official solo assignment in the Lions. So his expression lights up, and Vince now gets it. And Vince says out loud, Lion Guard duty, sounds great. So we get that reminder at the beginning of this episode that they can speak telepathically to each other. And then, of course, we're going to use that later on in the episode. All right, so on the Erusian Explorer ship, they're walking down a dimly lit corridor towards us, basically the audience. And Lance speaks into his Voltcom. He says, we're in, no sign of life. And then suddenly a gloved hand falls on his shoulder.
Definite Jurassic Park vibes there.
Yeah, he basically leaps out of his own shoes, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's looking at him and giggling, and Lance says, oh, like none of you would have jumped just a little. And Keith says, a little, maybe, but through the hole? Probably not.
So the arm is from a spacesuit that was, in a locker or something. Yeah.
Right, exactly. It was just hanging there.
Mm-hmm.
But Lance decides, I'll take point. So he goes on ahead of the others.
Yeah, and this is where we have a bit of deviation between the script and the finished episode. We see the character in this. So in the finished episode, we see characters walk past and trip a little laser.
Yeah,
and
yep.
Yeah, and the laser line turns green when the first person, Lance, trips it. In the script, it's a different story. Basically, it turns red for every person except Keith. For which it turns green. So there is a deviation there, and maybe it's better they did it the way that they did it in the finished episode because it keeps us from thinking anything about Keith in particular at this point in the story. I don't know. What do you think?
Right. That's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. But they round the corner and they see a fuzzy hologram of a crew member who's badly injured. And it seems to stare directly at Keith. Did you get that idea when you were watching this?
I don't remember specifically off the top of my head, but certainly what it says makes it seem that way.
Okay. So it says Commander Kogain. Now,
Yeah, and now go ahead.
Here's where we got to get into the pronunciation.
Yes.
Okay. So go ahead. You can talk about that.
So into Voltron, so we have to just going back in history, forgetting Legendary Defender for the moment, because imagine we're watching this show for the first time. Legendary Defender has not yet been conceived. In Defender of the Universe and the Third Dimension, no last names were ever established for any of the Voltron Force the Voltron Force characters. In Beast King Go Lion, the Keith character originated as a character named Akira Kogane, uh, Kogane, which is the spelling that's used here in the script. Um, and so, unless you know how it's spelled, it just sounds like a weird word. So, throughout this episode, you hear a reference to Kogane, and it's not Colgate, the toothpaste. It's not Rogaine, the hair product. It's Kogane. So maybe it's a combination hair product and toothpaste. But no, it's actually a reference to Akira Kogane, who pretty much was exclusively called Kogane in Go Lion. And so they've
Right.
decided that in this show, Keith's last name is Kogane.
Right. And then, of course, comes the funniest line. Hunk says, Cogain, who's Cogain? And then Alora says, Hunk, that's Keith's last name. And then Hunk says, oh, yeah, sometimes I forget we have last names.
My Lord.
I laughed so loud when I saw this the first time. Oh my God, that was so funny to me.
I can't remember how I responded to it the first time. I was probably amused. This is one of those things where it rides that line. Does it go beyond the line into overly meta, or is it right on the line? And I can't remember how I reacted. I remember thinking it was funny, but yeah, it's pretty on the nose.
I just remember I laughed so loud. Oh my gosh. So Keith says, how does this ship know me? And then the hologram says, I hope this reaches you. Intra-ship communications have been disrupted, but without the black line, the drool attack has been too much for our, and then it stops. So Pidge picks up his scanner. He says, I'm picking up readings of Hegarium somewhere on the ship. Maybe that's what activated the distress signal and set off that playback. Laura says, but how does that explain the playback being directed at Keith? And then Pidge says, maybe when we find the source of the Hegarium, we'll figure that out. So we go to another part of the Explorer ship, the mess hall. And can you tell that this is a mess hall when you get inside it? It's kind of dark.
I think if you have a chance to look at it in a freeze frame, yes. But I think as quickly as the establishing shot is made, I didn't make that connection the first time.
Yeah. It's lined with tables, and then there's sort of like a bunch of bodies lying around, right?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So there is a line. There are a couple. There's a couple lines cut out from the script that are not in the finished episode. We do like to touch on those as we go through this. There's a recorded voice that says, "Commander Kogane, welcome to lunch. We have prepared your favorite." And then Pidge says, "Looks like it's been overcooked by about a century." And then at that point, they seem to notice in the mess hall that there are bodies lying around. And the description in the script says, another hologram just appearing in flashes showing, and then in parentheses, TVY7, carnage in the mess hall, injured bodies draped over tables, smoke billowing, a wounded mess hall crewman looks at Keith. So it's implied that they're injured or maybe worse. The visuals are ambiguous. There are no obvious injuries on anyone. They might have been taking naps for all we know.
That's what I was going to say. They could just be sleeping.
Yeah.
But
it was a long shift.
But you're right. That whole part was cut off. Lance, when he comes in, says, "Okay, nothing here," and he gasps. And then you see the hologram that comes up and says, "Commander Kogane, Black Lion, the drools know the key, your destiny," and then it just trails off. And Alora's worried about Keith. She looks at him and she says, "Are you all right?" And Keith says, "Fine, let's keep going." So at this point, we know that there was some interaction between this explorer ship and the drools, obviously by the drool ships we saw outside, but also by what they're saying here. Okay, so they go into what appears to be the comms room. So Hunk heads for a console, checking the instruments. Systems seem to be active, glowing, but perhaps in a sleep mode. Pidge says Hegarium readings are off the chart in here. And Hunk says, how does the ship still have power after all this time? So he clicks some buttons and the console lights up. Then another hologram of a wounded comms officer appears, staring straight at Keith again. Commander Cogain, a distress signal has been sent to the Voltron force. So Pidge gets up next to Keith, and Pidge says the Voltron force of 100 years ago, the Hegarian definitely tripped these messages. So is this the first time that we've heard of a previous Voltron force prior to these guys?
No, not the first time, but the first time that we hear about it going back 100 years, at least 100 years. So there was an earlier episode where Karan explained to the cadets that he and Sky Marshal Wade had been at the academy together, the Galaxy Alliance Flight Academy, and had basically somehow gotten the attention of the Voltron Force. And Black Lion evaluated and rejected Wade as a potential new member of the Voltron Force. And it's never explained whether Karan was ever accepted, but he never actually mentioned ever having been in the Voltron Force, so who knows what went on. But that was the first indication that there was a prior generation in this show, and now we know that it goes back at least a century.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. The hologram says, if the force arrives in time, we may complete our quest, and what we have sought may yet be ours. But only with the Black Lion can we, looks away in horror, no, and then scratches off. So Keith says, who were these people and what were they looking for? And why do they seem to know me? That's all on the Explorer ship, but remember the cadets are looking after the Lions, right?
Yep.
So we go back out to where the Lions are, and at this point, we see black, green, and blue Lions hanging just outside of the Erusian Explorer, connected to the unmanned red and yellow Lions by energy tethers.
Mm-hmm.
So Daniel says, Black Lion to green, tethers to red and yellow are secure. I am now pushing lots of buttons and flipping lots of switches. Vince says, and I am doing the same. So where we see the black and green Lion's eyes lighting up with powerful beams, then going dark again as the switches are flipped inside, something outside goes across our field of vision so close we're not even sure we saw it. But inside the blue Lion, Larmina carefully scans the vista in front of her outside the view screen, scowling. You doofuses, we're supposed to be keeping lookout, not messing around. In the script, it says you doofi.
Yeah. So the plural of fungus is fungi. Apparently in the fourth draft of the script, the plural of doofus was doofi. I'm glad they changed it.
Yeah, because I understand what doofuses means.
Yeah.
Yep. So then Daniel says, Black Lion to green, did you just hear a lot of static on your comms? And this is all telepathic, by the way, what he's doing with Vince. Vince says, that's a 10-4, Black Lion, loud static. So they're ignoring her, basically. As the lights continue to flash from black and green Lions, we pan across the ship graveyard, and we end on a drool ship, heavily shadowed, and in the shadows see unblinking red eyes. So it illuminates huge bat-like creatures clinging to the ship with sharp claws. They shrink back away from the light, baring their fangs. So they're like robotic bats, right?
Yeah. And that's the end of Act 1.
Yeah, so there's a threat out there, basically.
Yeah. So I got to go back to the whole Cogain thing.
Yeah.
Do you think that when the people who recorded the voice, the director, the voice director, the various voice actors, given a pronunciation guide, for this name? Were they told to pronounce it as Cogain? Were they told nothing and just had to make a decision on the fly? What do you think?
Well, I kind of think that they wanted to separate themselves from the original Beats King Go Lion.
Yeah.
And I think they wanted to make it more of an Americanized, Canadianized version of the name.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Rather than the Japanese pronunciation of the name.
Yeah. I remember because I've always been a nerd in pretty much every aspect of my life. But when it comes to Voltron, in particular, I remember when I was jotting down notes from this episode as I watched it at the time, maybe to join in a fan review on the old Voltron.com forums. I remember trying to figure out, well, what in the world is this name? And I remember typing like Cogain because I had no clue what in the world the word was. I just didn't make the connection with Kogane because of the pronunciation. So
Mhm.
it's one of those deals where it's like they want to have a tip of the hat, but because it's not bloody obvious that it's an Easter egg, it just sounds like a weird word.
And as you mentioned before, the hair product it rhymed with was Rogaine.
Yeah, that's right. And Keith has never had a problem with hair, at least as far
No,
as we know.
no. We see Larmina saying, Daniel, Vince, I'm not seeing anything. How about you report? And Daniel starts talking to Vince telepathically. What do you think, Vince? Should we tune Larmina back in? And Vince says, yeah, let's cut her a break. But this telepathy thing, awesome. So Daniel says, Larmina, listen, we're not doing any good sitting here. Let's take the Lions for a spin and explore the area. Vince says, wait, what? Leave red and yellow alone? I don't think that's a good idea, Daniel. Larmina, who's excited, says, but there are lots of points on this grid we can't see. We definitely should patrol. Daniel says, we'll stay in range of the Lions, Vince. Come on. And Vince says, okay, for a little while. So they retract the tethers and they go out on their own.
Yes.
So Daniel eagerly grabs his controls and flies away, flipping and spinning, doing all kinds of graceful maneuvers. And Larmina smiles, grabs her own controls, and says, you call that flying? So you see the blue lion darting between drool ships. The green lion shoots off to join them, making his own impressive moves. And Vince says, right on your tails. Daniel says, ice down those goosebumps, Vince. Those ships have been empty for years. And this is him talking telepathically again. Vince says, I wasn't thinking they were scary. Okay, maybe a little. What's up with all the flashy flying anyway? Oh, trying to impress Larmina? Daniel says, I don't know what you're talking about. Hey, want to put this mind talk to good use and have some fun with Larmina? When I say now, break left. Now. And then they both break left, right? Well,
Yeah. So
actually Vince breaks left. Daniel breaks right with Larmina in the middle, right?
yeah. And I love Daniel saying, when I say now, this is all telepathic. So it's a telepathic now.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, yeah.
And then Larmina says, hey, where are you guys going? Larmina says, Vince, Daniel, where are you? This is getting creepy, guys. And then they're smiling and having a great time. And Daniel says telepathically, all right, we don't want to drive her too crazy. And Vince says into the comm, Larmina, we're over here. So Daniel says, we were right here. Maybe you should check your equipment. And then Vince says, yeah, or at least polish your view screen. Larmina says, if you two were messing with me. And Daniel says, who, us? Why, Larmina? How could you think? And then suddenly two bat creatures streak between them, each gripping one of the unmanned lions in their talons. So they're basically stealing red and yellow, right?
Yes. If only they were watched by some people. Oh well.
But Daniel, as they see this happen, he says, they got our lions. And Vince says, now who's got goosebumps? Daniel says, what are those things? Vince says, maybe they're what wrecked all these old ships, and we're going to be the next addition to this graveyard. Larmina says, not on my watch. Let's get those lions back. So Daniel says, this will be easy. There's only 2 of them and 3 of, and then they chase the bat creatures. Suddenly a swarm of more bats swirls out from behind. And Larmina says, you had to jinx us, didn't you? So that's it for that scene.
Yep. They do like to mess with Larmina.
Yeah. So in all of this, this is again another sort of like there's an A plot and a B plot, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And it seems to be the regular Voltron pilots have their plot, and then the cadets have their plot.
And yeah, this is kind of a typical pattern for the show.
Right. So we go back to the Explorer ship, and you close on Keith, who's horrified because he sees another hologram, Commander Cogain. And it's the hologram saying, please, it is of vital importance you alert the Black Lion that, and then more static.
Yeah, and this guy's laying on the ground. I mean, he's definitely hurt, or just feels the need to lay down and talk loudly. But
Yeah.
it sure, the implication here is that this guy's actually pretty badly hurt. Although the script again points out, again, TVY7 wounded.
Right. And this time, Alora says, it's okay. We've already seen this one, remember, about 20 minutes ago. And Lance says, that doesn't make it any less freaky. This ship is a maze. And to Alora, he says, what is it about your people, Alora? Don't Erusians believe in making simple ships? Alora says, Lance, this isn't the time. Something important and mysterious is happening here, and Keith is a part of it. Pidge says, let's find a quieter spot, see if we can check in with the cadets. And he's talking to Hunk. And Lance says, sheesh, everyone doesn't need to be so testy just because the haunted ship knows Keith's name. And then Lance says, Pidge, did you reach the cadets? Pidge says, no, my guess is the Hegarium is throwing off our communications with the Lions. All right, so that's how the reason why later on, Alora and Keith are unable to contact the Lions.
Right.
Because at one point in this episode, they were talking to each other through their comms.
Yeah.
This is the cutoff.
Yeah. And so if folks haven't made the connection yet, and I don't think it's ever explicitly spelled out, the reason the comms room is so full of Hegarium, as Pidge says, is presumably because the satellite on Castle Doom that sent a message was intercepted by the Explorer through its comm system, which filled the comm room with Hegarium and began to cause all sorts of nastiness to take place on the ship. So that at least covers why the Hegarium signal seems to be coming from the comms room.
Yes. Okay, so Lance says, Pidge, Hunk, what's happening? What's your position? Because what happened was the corridor lights went red, security tentacles emerged from the walls, grabbing Pidge and Hunk, throwing them against the bulkhead. You hear things saying, intruder alert, lethal defense measures initiated, and they had grabbed Hunk and Pidge.
And so this is the first time we see an Erusian ship having a particularly nasty internal defense system. And we will see that again, of course, in Voltron Legendary Defender when the castle ship's crystal gets corrupted and all sorts of bad stuff happening there.
Right. So Lance takes off in the direction they went. And he says, we've got to find them and fast. You two go that way. And he's talking to Alora and Keith. Back to Pidge and Hunk, who are painfully struggling in their constraints. So Lance appears at the end of the corridor with his pistols drawn. He says, guys, and then he blasts like several of the tentacles. The last 2 free Pidge and Hunk, who drop to the ground catching their breath. Lance kicks away the tentacle shards, helping his friends to their feet. And then he says, Keith, Alora, I found them, but stay alert. Looks like the ship has packed up the welcome mat and gotten a lot less friendly. But where Keith and Alora are, they seem a little bit bewildered because for them, you hear Alora say, "We read you, Lance, but we're getting the opposite feeling. The ship seems very welcoming."
Interesting.
Yeah. So Lance says, "Well, keep your eyes open and keep trying to find a spot to reach the cadets. We'll do the same."
Maybe. Oh, I know what I know why it's welcoming to Keith and Allura, because this is a ship that they're on, and it is a shipper for Keith and Allura. Just kidding.
Oh boy. Well, I got to tell you, by the end of this episode, there were going to be a lot of people that shipped Keith and Alora.
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay. So Keith says welcoming. That's how it feels. So they walk on, and then we go back out to where
Back into space.
where the cadets are.
Yeah.
Okay. A bat creature zooms past, red lion in its talons. Hot on its heels, blue trails it. As it passes, we see the roiling cloud of bat creatures buzzing around black and green. Green gets raked by the claws of a bat creature. In the cockpit, Vince tries to stay calm and keep his lion functional. He says, "There's too many of them." And Larmina says, "Just find the one with the other lion and focus on that." Vince says, "Oh, sure. You don't have 5,000 of them chasing you." Daniel says, "Hang in there, Vince." And he's saying it telepathically. Then telepathically he says, "I've got your back. You've got a bunch coming from your left. Wide burst fire." And telepathically Vince says, "Got him. Good spotting." And then a little bit later in Larmina's cockpit, she looks back over her shoulders, keeping an eye on what her friends are doing as she maintains her own pursuit. She says, "Vince, careful. You don't want to hit the lion by accident." Okay, so then Daniel telepathically to Vince says, "Vince, I'm going to come up alongside you with these things behind us. At least they'll be out of our way." So Black ducks, dodges, and otherwise swoops around jewel ships and bats matching him move for move. And then on green, in hot pursuit of the bat holding yellow, which alights momentarily on a jewel ship, Vince says telepathically, "Go for it. I'm not sure I can catch this one alone." He fires, missing, and his beams screech across the hull of a droll ship. The bat recoils, dropping the yellow lion. The black zooms in beside green. The other bats follow them in a cloud, and Daniel says, "Yeah, way to go, Vince, but I didn't think you even hit it." Vince says, "I didn't, so why did..." "Oh, of course." And then Larmina says, "Let go of me, you flapping freaks." So Blue struggles in the claws of several bat creatures, clutching at it from the flocks in mass roost on a large drool ship. Split screen, Daniel and Vince, telepathically. "We forgot about..." And then Daniel says, "Larmina, we're coming," out loud. Larmina, "About time, little help, team." Vince says, "Sorry about that, Larmina, but I have an idea that will hopefully make it up to you. These things are like bats, right?" Vince says, "Adjust your comms for a beam of ultra high frequency and transmit now." All three lions, you see sound waves radiating from them, right?
Yes, in space.
In space. But that's explained later. We'll get to that.
Yes, explained very well too. Yes.
Yeah, okay, the bats, having landed on a drill ship, react with agony, flap away madly, releasing red and blue. So Larmina says, "Got it. Nice call, Vince. Even though there's no sound in the vacuum of space, those vibrations must have given them crazy headaches. But what took you so long? What were you doing?" So that's it. That's it. They were.
It's not sound, it's vibrations, which is what sound is. Sound is a mechanical wave that causes vibrations. So it's not sound that doesn't travel in space, it's vibrations that somehow still travel in space. I know. Mark is shrugging, but
It's science fiction.
that's true. I just think it's funny.
Yeah.
The other thing is Vince saying these things are like bats, right? And you might say, well, they kind of look like bats. They might not be anything like bats, but doggone it, they look like them. So let's try something that bats are sensitive to.
It
Oh,
worked.
well, that's right.
Okay. So Lance says, cadets, come in. You read? And Daniel says, go ahead, Lance. Everything's normal out here. Larmina and Vince says, yep, very quiet. Nothing going on. Lance says, well, good. Pidge, Hunk, and I are back where you dropped us off. Come pick us up. And Larmina says, on our way. It's not like we've been doing anything else. Daniel says, nope, nothing at all. Very boring.
Hmm.
So the reason that Lance was able to talk to them because they were on an opening in the hull of the ship, right?
Yeah.
So they weren't in that comms room anymore.
Yeah. Pitch speaks to that very soon. Yes.
Yeah. The tethers holding red and yellow disengage and the 5 lines assume formation. Following all the pilots with Vince sitting behind Pidge, all look concerned peering out their viewports. So Lance says, Pidge, any response from Keith or Allura? Pidge says, no, I think our signal only got through to the cadets because we were by a hull breach. Hunk says, so do we wait for them to find that spot or do we blast another hole for them?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Just fire randomly into the ship.
Not that you would hit them, right?
No, not at all.
So Daniel says, I think we might have a bigger question. Is that drool ship moving toward us? So as you're looking at the lions, turn to look at a huge shadow approaching them from the smaller drool derelicts. Pidge on the comm says, hard to tell with all its lights off. Maybe the Hegarium activated it somehow. Suddenly, lights flicker on the shadowy ship, revealing it as Lotor's command ship, closing in on them. And Daniel says, or maybe it's Lotor's command ship. And that's the end of Act 2.
I sure am glad that Daniel said maybe it's Lotor's command ship because I don't immediately recognize a lot of the vehicles in Voltron Force. So when you've got all these other ships just lying around in space and they're kind of not very well, you don't see a whole lot of focus on them other than the Erusian Explorer. The other ones are just kind of in the background or so much in the foreground you can't get a good look at the drill ships. When this one shows up, it is in no way obvious that it's Lotor's.
Right.
So I'm glad they point that out themselves.
All right, so we're in Act 3. We're in the final act. So Lotor's ship is bearing down on the lions, and Lotor says, excellent work, Mayhawks. And Mayhawks says, yes, the Hegarium satellite's beam has reactivated the communication systems of this missing fleet as expected and led us right to the treasure your ancestors sought. So that blue beam that we saw at the very beginning of the show.
And they never, and again, while this episode never explicitly states it, it seemingly also activated the comm systems of the Explorer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. So Lotor says, not to mention the Voltron force. And Mayhawk says, my lord, king, sir, I advise you to secure the treasure first. Then Lotor dismisses him with a wave of his hand, smiling. He says, silence. My ancestors would not pass up an opportunity like this, and neither shall I.
This is kind of interesting. He's talking about his ancestors. One thing that is never really made clear in any of the Voltron shows prior to Legendary Defender is how old different aliens can live to be. And Lotor being a drool, and his father has been suggested by terms like the Zarkonian Wars, and we see a statue of him in an early episode. Who knows how long drools live? This certainly implies that Lotor and possibly also Zarkon weren't around 100 years ago. On the other hand, in the original series, Zarkon celebrates his 500th birthday. So, maybe he was, such a cool king, even maybe back 100 years ago, that he didn't have to, settle for going into space at all. So He maybe he was around back then, and Lotor just doesn't want to think about it. Who knows?
Yeah. So the Lions watch the command ship slow before them, and Lance says, "Keep trying to raise Allura and Keith. We're going to need Voltron." And Hunk says, "Stay alert, something's coming out." So you see the tiny figure of Lotor wearing a spacesuit version of his Icarium armor. So
That guy is there's no end of surprises to what that guy can do.
yeah, so we've seen him in lots of different outfits in this
Oh
show.
yeah. He's had the samurai armor.
Mhm.
He's been a giant muscular dude with a severe skin problem. Uh he's been all sorts of things, but now he's got space armor. So he's kind of like Drool Iron Man or Iron Drool. I don't know.
So Pitch says, "It's Lotor. What's he doing?" So Lotor serenely sweeps his arm in an arc, and a drool ship moves in the direction he gestures toward the Lions, gathering speed. So as the drool ship comes on fast, Daniel says, "How's he bringing it back to life?" Pidge says he must have a Hegarian power source. Then on Lotor's hands widen, and you see that Lotor gestures grandly, sweeping his arms around like a conductor, and waves of drool ships respond, streaming toward the Lions. Pidge says, "Scratch that. He is the Hegarian power source."
Garium could do just about anything, can't it?
The drool ships stream towards us. They fire. The Lions dodge, but blue and green are hit. Larmina and Pidge are rocked by the impacts. So another drool derelict simply slams into Red. Lance is nearly thrown out of his seat. You hear him say, "This is ridiculous. We need to form Voltron now." Pitch says, "Without Keith and Black, Lance, we've never tried it before."
Yeah. So again, this suggests that Keith has always been in black for them when they've combined. And is this a sequel to the original series? Maybe, maybe not. But in the original series, there was an episode in which Allura was flying Black Lion when they formed Voltron, and she even, as Keith was ordering from the Blue Lion, form feet and legs, form arms and body, Allura says, "And I'll form the head this time," which was really cool. But apparently, these guys either don't remember that or it didn't happen in this timeline or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Right. So we go back to Keith and Allura. They enter a room, and Allura says, "This appears to be the bridge. Perhaps there will be a ship map in here." They hurry to a console, push buttons, and a hologram appears before them, and it has a distinctive logo.
Oh, it's distinctive, all right. What is it, Mark?
It's the logo that's on the chest of Voltron.
The original Voltron. Yeah.
Yeah, except in the original Voltron, can you see that?
Oh, I see it.
It has the cross.
Yes.
In Voltron Force version of this logo, there is no cross.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Looking again at a screen cap, this is the Voltron Force version of the logo. There are times in this show when we do see the original logo with the cross, usually as wall art or something decorating older things that suggest older Castle of Lions interiors and things like that. But yeah, this one is indeed the Voltron Force logo. So yeah.
Right.
But it's also something else, as Allura just is about to point out.
She mentions the Knights of Aris.
Interesting.
Yes.
So what are the Knights of Eris in your mind, or do you have a thought about that?
As soon as she says that, I don't know what to think. I don't know if these are the original, like, I don't know, protectors of the planet Eris. I don't know if these are the original pilots that formed Voltron the first time. I don't know what this means at this point.
Yeah, and the fact that all these holograms keep talking about the need to call the Voltron Force suggests that maybe these guys are associated with the Voltron Force, but possibly aren't the Voltron Force. But again, it's anyone's guess because we don't really learn much more about it at all in this
Right.
episode or any that follow.
All right, so the hologram dissolves to the face of the first officer. The first officer says, "First officer's log, we believe we are close to our goal." And as he speaks, holograms of complex star maps pop up around his head. Keith and Alora looking on in wonder, and the first officer continues, "We have discovered that the maps we have acquired from the alien races we have encountered, when assembled in a certain manner, point the way to the fifth planet involved in the creation of Voltron." And you see these things like hovering around, and then they connect, and then they form this image.
And I'll form the map. Yeah.
Right. So the maps merge into this incredibly complex star map with a particular planet highlighted. And Alora says, "That must be the energy planet, the one responsible for the power of the lions." Keith says, "No wonder the Drools wanted this explorer." And the first officer says, "Our mission is almost at an end, and the commander has spoken many times of seeing it through for future Erusian generations, like that of his grandson, Kenneth Cogain." Keith says, "Kenneth Cogain was my father's name, but he can't mean, it just can't be. My family's from Earth." Laura's putting pieces together in her head and saying, "Maybe not. Think about it, Keith. It all makes sense. Maybe all these messages have been directed at you, and the ship didn't attack you because it thinks you're Commander Cogain, your great-grandfather, Knight of Aris."
Pretty wild. And what's more wild is that if Commander Cogain is actually talking about his grandson as of 100 years ago, and that is Keith's father must have been really old when Keith was born.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
So Keith says, "My family came from Aris? I don't understand." And Laura says, "Destiny often has that effect on people. You weren't brought to Aris to lead the Voltron force. You were brought back to Aris, brought home. This is incredible." She's looking around. All of this. But now we need to get Pidge so he can download all the data and maps from this computer. And then all of a sudden, the ship starts swaying with impacts. Keith says something's happening and close to the Explorer. And Laura says, "Lotor." So we're back out in space. Lance is shaking his head at this impossible situation, saying, "We can't hold out much longer. I think we need the power of the big guy here." Daniel says, "I can do this." He says, "I can form Voltron. I've done it before." Lance says, "Yeah, but never without Keith there holding your hand in case something goes wrong. You're still a cadet." Daniel says, "Well, something's definitely going to go wrong if we don't give this cadet a chance." Lance says, "All right, Daniel, don't make me regret this." And Daniel says, "You won't. Now get ready, team. We're going to do this fast. Flash form, go." And then they form Voltron.
And one thing that's kind of fun is that the sequence starts out like a typical one, where you see the lions go up, kind of fly away, and then you see the black lion from underneath as it's stretching its limbs downward, as if it's going to be a conventional formation. And then they cut to the flash formation sequence, and then they cut to a separate shot of the head forming. It's kind of an interesting hybrid of the typical flash form sequence that we see and the typical formation sequence. So it's kind of new and edited together in a neat way. And I think I always enjoy when they break the mold and do something original with that. So that was cool.
Yeah. Right. So Keith watches the combat and his eyes widen, and he says, "They formed Voltron. How?" And then he realizes, Daniel. And then you see Voltron smashing drool ships left and right as Daniel cheers his cockpit, loving it. "Yeah, you can't fling them if you don't got them." And then you see Lotor enraged. He gestures at Voltron, Hegarium energy radiating forth, and Voltron shudders, rocked by the Hegarium. And then you see Pidge gritting his teeth. Daniel's eyes flash purple. He's stunned. Pidge says, Hegarium surge. Pidge says, Daniel? Daniel says, I'm okay. Vince says, Daniel, are you sure? And he says this telepathically. Daniel says, yeah, I'm cool. That Hegarian blast just rattled me for a sec, but... And then Lance says, Daniel, we need some firepower. Center me now. So Daniel goes, gotcha, Lance. Form red center. So they form red center. And now Lance says, draw magma pistols. So Voltron...
So then Voltron gets a pencil and starts drawing on the side of a drill ship.
No.
Just kidding.
No, so Voltron starts firing the magma pistols at the drill ships.
Yep.
So Lotor sees this and smiles. His point of view, Voltron hovers before him, making its comeback, push past Voltron to see the biggest drool derelict of all accelerating towards the unaware robot. And it's got Hegarium energy. So he's pulling this big ship towards Voltron, and Voltron can't see it. So Keith sees what's coming, and Alora rushes from the console, and Keith says, no, Lotor's turned that giant drill ship into a Hegarium missile, and it's heading right for Voltron. Alora says, I can't locate the ship's comm systems. We can't warn the Force. So desperately, Keith lunges into the command chair, scanning its arms for controls. Alora hurries to him. Keith says, we need weapons control. Alora says, do you see anything? And he says, no, but then a wavy, silent hologram, different in appearance from the others, of a chiseled, handsome figure, clearly a leader in uniform, appears eerily before them, looking directly at Keith, smiling. And Alora says, Keith, is that your great-grandfather? Then a tube slams down from above around Keith and Alora, and they're sucked up and out of the ship.
It's pretty wild.
Did that catch you by surprise a little bit?
Oh, yeah. I mean, given all that we've seen, the ship has been welcoming them. So what's going on here? It's now throwing them out of the ship. There must be a reason, but what is it? It's not entirely clear yet.
Right. So Keith and Alora are flung from a hatch at the top of the ship into space. And of course, their Voltcoms create that suit around them automatically, right?
Yep.
So behind them, the engines of the Explorer roar to life and the ship moved past them, picking up speed. And then Voltron battling on, unaware of the oncoming drool. And then at the last possible moment, the Explorer strikes the drill ship just before it can reach Voltron. There's a massive explosion that sends even Voltron tumbling.
So I will say this: I haven't mentioned Babylon 5 in a long time, Mark, and I'm past due.
Yeah.
There's an episode of Babylon 5 where the lead character is on his ship called the Agamemnon, and he's about to ram into a weapons platform in space. And at the very, very last moment, another Earth ship called the Apollo shows up and rams the platform from the side and saves the Agamemnon's bacon. And every time when I first saw this thing, this episode came out about 15 years after the Babylon 5 episode. And I remember thinking of that particular scene. Really neat scene. And it's very cool here too.
Yeah. Lotor is tumbling as well, and then he writes himself, his spacesuit is badly damaged. Mayhawk says, Sire, your suit has been compromised. And then scowling, Lotor jets back to the hatch of his command ship, which closes behind him. And Mayhawk says, well, my lord, it appears the Explorer and its treasure have been destroyed. Lotor says, yes, and Voltron is next. And Mayhawk says, inadvisable, your Hegarium supply is depleted. Continued engagement might well prove fatal to you. Perhaps you'll heed my advice this time? And with that, He grits his teeth, furious. The ship activates its thrusters and makes its escape.
Well, nobody got what they wanted, really.
No. So Keith says, I was going to steer the Explorer into the path of the missile, but I couldn't find the controls. Allura says, then how did the ship know? Maybe there was a connection between the Commander Cogain on the ship and Keith and those thoughts, and maybe they just thought the same thing.
Maybe.
Okay.
So we may never know.
Pidge, back at the Castle of Lions at the command center, says, all the data that ship had. And Pidge says, are you sure you can't remember anything else about that map to the fifth planet? Keith says, I only saw it for a second. Lance says, and so the mystery of the ghost ship continues. Spooky voice. And then Allura says, Lance. And then she gently leads Keith away. Lance watches them go, his expression making it clear he realizes something meaningful has passed between Keith and Allura.
So we should point out that when Keith and Allura are in space, in the last moments that we see them in their spacesuits together, they hold hands, which is a big deal in this particular show, because there really hasn't been, aside from a hug from Allura to Keith when he first shows up, she first sees him again in the earliest episodes. This is the first indication that there may be something between the two of them. And of course, Keith and Allura have been linked romantically in the minds of many fans since the original Defender of the Universe. So yeah, this is kind of a big deal for longtime fans.
Yeah. So on another wall, Daniel and Vince are just staring at each other. Daniel's saying telepathically to Vince, this doesn't seem like the best time to tell everyone we can read each other's thoughts. Vince says, definitely not. And then Larmina goes up to them and says, hey, what's with the staring contest? You two have been acting very strange lately. And then Daniel and Vince look at each other, and Daniel telepathically says, she's not everyone. Vince nods. Daniel pulls puzzled Larmina by the elbow away from the Voltron force, and Daniel says, Larmina, can you keep a secret? And then you see her eyebrow raise, and then that's the end.
That's it. So what do you think of the episode?
Yeah. So here we are. We're continuing on the whole thing about Vince and Daniel being able to speak to each other telepathically. And at the same time, we're learning a little bit more about that fifth planet. And at the same time, there was a little bit of weirdness going on because signals from space from 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Things that Mayhax is going after. Lotor wants to go after the Voltron force, doesn't necessarily care about the treasure. The treasure is really just learning more about Voltron.
Right.
And if Mayhax gets that information ahead of the Voltron force, it could mean bad things for the Voltron force.
Right.
So the stakes are pretty high, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we learn that, wow, holy moly, this whole time we thought Keith was from Earth, he may have been from Aris.
Yeah, pretty amazing stuff. So if you're a lore junkie, this episode's got a lot of little nuggets of info for you. There was at the time, I remember thinking when they talked about the 5 planets that led to Voltron's creation, what is it? Earth, Eris, Balto, the Lion Rider's planet. What's that called?
Ariel.
Yeah, yes, Ariel, and then this 5th planet. I was kind of wondering, with Keith being revealed as an Erusian, or at least someone with Erusian history, I kind of wondered where eventually, if there had been a second season, maybe the entire Voltron force would be revealed as having each, one member of the Force would have perhaps been found to be a descendant from each of those 5 planets. Um, I mean, obviously that never came to pass, but there's this big mystery about Vince that has never been resolved. But certainly he has seems to have the power of the lions and has this knack for communicating with them and doing all sorts of things with his Voltcom energy tendrils and all that. It seems like he might be related to the people from that unseen planet.
Yeah, if we found out that Keith wasn't necessarily from Earth, maybe we find out that Vince wasn't necessarily from Earth, and
Yeah, so
maybe he was from that 5th planet.
yeah, so with spoilers at the end of the series, um, the Voltron force consists of Keith and Lance and Hunk and Vince and Larmina. Because Allura and Pidge, again, spoilers, resign and do other things. So we're left with Keith, who he knows from Eris. Larmina, well, at least descends from Eris. Larmina is from Eris. Pidge is from Balto. If Vince was from the 5th planet, then the only planets left are what? You've got Ariel,
Yeah,
and yeah,
and does that mean that Hunk is from Ariel?
who knows?
I don't know.
Or I don't know. Anyway, that was just a thought that I remember having back at that time. Um, and again, as a historical sort of a memory jog, when these episodes first aired and the season closed out, we had no idea at that time that the show was not going to return for a second season. So the mindset leading all the way through and past the finale is that we would eventually see a second season. And seeing all these little info drops and the promise of things to come, it really is even more of a bummer that did not come to fruition.
Now, the only thing that we did get that relates to a second season was, of course, that comic at the end of Voltron from Days of Long Ago, a 30th anniversary celebration. And
Yeah, and who?
and in that comic, they did name that 5th planet.
Yeah, it was like they call it Voltronimus or something like that.
Voltronics.
Voltronics, that's it. Okay.
Yeah, Voltronics.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking of Voltronimus Prime when they were trying to think of a name for what became Awesome Tron. So, yeah, I had my memories crossed there. But yeah, yeah. And of course, the name doesn't really tell us anything further about what the planet is all about. But
Right.
it sounds cool. Anyway.
So now we've gotten to the part where we only have 23, 24, 25, and 26 left.
Yes. So the quest that we set out on how many years ago?
Several years ago.
We may actually finish it this calendar year.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So anyway, yeah, gosh, I know there are people who aren't fond of Voltron Force, and at times I almost get the vibe at VoltCon presentations that there are folks who feel almost who worked on the show. I'm thinking specifically of Bob and Jeremy, who sometimes they almost act like they're apologetic that it didn't get any further than it did. It certainly wasn't anything in anyone's control, but whatever the case, I really enjoyed this show. I mean, we've both said in the past, it revived our interest in Voltron as a whole.
Yep.
And
that's why we're here.
This podcast would not exist without Voltron Force.
Nope.
I would wager that I know nothing about the behind the scenes stuff that went into Voltron Force or Voltron Legendary Defender, but it is very possible that Voltron Legendary Defender would never have come along had it not been for Voltron Force. Connections made in the modern era between people making, current animated shows. Who knows what connections led to Legendary Defender?
Well, the big thing that made that happen for Voltron Legendary Defender, of course, was the sale of classic media, right?
Yeah.
To DreamWorks.
Mm-hmm.
So DreamWorks gets this whole catalog of, many, many different, shows that classic media had, the intellectual property of or licensing for, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So DreamWorks made this deal with Netflix that they were going to provide 300 hours of programming. And as part of that was a lot of the classic media stuff, which
Yeah.
included Voltron.
And Classic Media is listed as being associated with WEP for the production of this show. And it was at about this time that the WEP Classic Media connection was, at least acknowledged. When it actually formed, not really sure, but it does seem like Voltron Forces were about the time that union happened or that partnership happened. So that does seem to reinforce that Voltron Force led to VLD.
You see that?
Yep, Classic Media on the Blockbuster Funko Voltron thing. Yeah,
Yeah. So despite the
still
fact,
listed as a licensing partner.
right. So despite the fact that Classic Media was basically bought out by DreamWorks, it's still being used as like a licensee.
Yeah, which is weird because I thought it became DreamWorks Classics, and then the NBC Universal thing came along, and with all the mergers, I can't keep up with any of that stuff for any company. Honestly, it's so rapidly changing in many industries. But yeah, they still have some identity as Classic Media through all this.
Right. It says World Events Productions Limited under license to Classic Media LLC.
Yeah.
So it's still something that is printed on merchandise that you get for Voltron.
Yep. So, I mean, all of this to summarize that while Voltron Force did not have the level of success that I'm sure a lot of people hoped for, it's a great show, I think, in its own right. This is one of the better episodes of the series, and I just dig the show. I hope that if there's anyone out there listening who, by this point, if you haven't watched Voltron Force, you've probably tuned this out a long time ago. But if you're still hanging on for some odd reason, please give the show a chance. It deserves a look.
Right. And we still have 4 more episodes to review. So keep watching us on Let's Voltron, the official Voltron podcast.
Yep.
And thank you for joining us once again for another exciting episode of Let's Voltron, where we've actually talked to Ryan, the social media manager from Laughing Dragon.
Of course, reviewed the Voltron Force episode, Frost Signals.
Yes. So it's been wonderful getting back with this. And of course, we're going to finish these up, but we may have some other surprise guests along the way. So we are looking forward to that as well. So this is the Knights of Eris signing off. And we'll see you all next time on
Let's Voltron.